You may not perfectly remember the whole movie from 1996, but you definitely remember a scene from it. The movie was Jerry Maguire. Many of you can imagine what scene I'm going to say. There was a scene between Tom Cruise, the leading man, and Renee Zellweger, the leading woman in that show, and he was trying to say, I can't live without you. I'm in love with you, and I can't bear to face a day without you. And so he looked at her with his bottom lip trembling, his eyes swelled with tears, and he said, "You complete me." And he gets the girl. And for the past 25 years since then, we've had a very mixed up idea about how love and life really works. We celebrate freedom this weekend. And part of that, for our national celebration, is the privilege we have to live in a democracy. And today's readings are all about that freedom and even deeper freedom. The thing about that line, "You complete me," is that it's a load of hooey. It's not true that another person could ever complete us. If that were true, then he would be half a person. He'd be like some kind of puzzle piece with a jagged edge that is searching for the one puzzle piece that can make it finished. He's like a picture that's ripped in half with a jagged edge. So, if he is not complete without her, what happens if she leaves him? What happens if she dies? In the gospel today, we hear, if you think you need a girlfriend more than you need me, you've lost your way. You're not thinking clearly. If you think a significant other is what you most need to have a full life, you're lost. If you prioritize your mother or father above me, you've got to sort that out. Even son or daughter, he says, which is a real challenge for anybody who has a child going off to college this fall. If you prioritize your son or your daughter over me, you've got a problem. It's interesting because if we were asked, who is the most important person in your life? It's almost a cultural obligation to say, my children, of course. My children are the most important thing in my life. Maybe if you don't have kids, you might say, my husband or my wife. But the gospel is challenging us today. Is that your final answer? The first commandment of the 10 Commandments is, I'm the Lord your God. You can't have any other God besides me. And I will say that in the 10 years I've had as a priest and have heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of confessions, rarely do I hear someone confess breaking the first commandment. And the reason I think for that is that very few of us earlier this week were worshiping Zeus. And so we figure, well, I didn't worship Zeus, so I didn't break the first commandment. But for people in our day, it's very unlikely that the way we break that commandment is by worshiping Thor or Aphrodite or Zeus. It's probably having something or someone else in the number one spot. It's not that we're actively worshiping some other god of some other religion. It's not Zeus that's the problem. For many people in our society, we would never worship Zeus, but we may worship our children. The Celts always said that inside every human person, there's a God-shaped hole. Every person has a God-shaped hole inside of them, and only God fits there. It's the shape of God. And that empty space is hard to bear. We would prefer not to have an emptiness. And so we put other people in there, like Renee Zellweger. But it's not shaped like another person, or like a hobby, or like an activity or an attraction or anything like that. It's a God-shaped hole. So anything that's not God will not fit there. For those of us who believe that we're incomplete unless we have another person by our side, we're always going to be challenged by the people that are sitting out there right now, who a year ago at this time had a spouse sitting next to them that's no longer here. There's some people sitting here right now that had a spouse by their side 1 year ago. There's a couple people here right now that I'm recognizing had a spouse sitting by their side a few months ago. So what then? What do we do when the thing that we thought we needed to be complete cannot be held on to? God is the only one, the only thing we can never lose. My immigrant Polish family came to the United States from Poland at the beginning of the 20th century, and they settled in Little Watervliet, New York. And one of the reasons that they went there is because other Polish relatives had already come and were living their life centered around the Polish Catholic parish in Watervliet, Immaculate Conception. That little church was the home for all of the Polish people. It was a place where they could go and speak their language and be together and have their faith. In time, they built a school, and they had an order of Polish nuns that would run the school. One of my great aunts became one of those nuns. And the priest that everyone thinks of when they think of Immaculate Conception Parish is a priest named Father Wladek Wątroba, who was there for 70 years. He became the pastor in the 1940s. And then he lived his whole priesthood there. He retired, and then he stayed there. But like a lot of things, the neighborhood changed. And all those Polish immigrants that lived in that neighborhood in a really tight-knit community, they spread out. They moved all over the area. And so the church wound up losing attendance and becoming less vibrant. And by the time he was interviewed for his 70th anniversary as a priest, the parish had just closed. He lived long enough to see the parish go out of existence. They interviewed him at the Evangelist to ask him about his 70 years of priesthood, and they asked him that question. They asked him, Father Wątroba, how does it feel to have lost the church that you spent your whole life serving? And I wrote down this quote that he said in response. Everything can be taken away, but I know what I did for so many people, that they're getting along and they're working out their salvation. They have learned about God, and God still reigns. That's all that matters. This week we are being asked, what would it look like? What would it feel like to be that free? That we don't need anything, even something like that, for Father Wątroba to complete us. The prayer that I think of when I think of that kind of freedom is the prayer of St. Teresa of Avila. It's one of my very favorites. It's the prayer that goes like this. It's so powerful I memorized it. Let nothing trouble you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing. God never changes. Patience will gain you all things. If you have God, you lack nothing. Alone, God is enough. What would it look like? What would it feel like to be that free? All things are passing, but God never changes. If you have God, you lack nothing. Alone, God is enough.